Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar presented by uh, Renew Physical Therapy. This is the third of three presentations in our athletic performance series, and this deals with endurance. I'm Kent Timm, the managing director of the Saginaw Bay Road facility. As some of you know, I have a PhD in exercise science from Columbia University, a doctor of physical therapy degree from the University of Indianapolis, and I'm a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine. From a practical basis, I've been doing this type of thing for about 40 years now. The purpose today is to talk about endurance as a little bit of a review. This again is the third of three presentations. The previous presentations back in February dealing with strength and in March dealing with power are available for viewing or viewing again at www.renewpt.com/videos. And this one is also being recorded, so you can certainly watch it in the future if you have any desire to do so. You can also get a list of upcoming events and register for those events at www.renewpt.com/events. Okay, so today we're talking about endurance, but before we get into some more information, let's kind of look at what we intend to try to learn today, or what I'm going to try to cover. The objectives for today, in no particular order, is to answer the question, what exactly is muscle endurance? Like many things in contemporary society, and certainly when it deals to human performance and human physiology and medicine in general, sometimes different words mean different things to different people. And so we need to think about how and what endurance really is and why it's important, and be able to, as the second objective list there, differentiate between strength, power, and endurance, especially when we're talking about exercise or training for the specific applications of a patient, of an athlete, or basically just a person out there in the routine world of day-to-day work and function. And then the third learning objective is to hopefully project an understanding of the components of an exercise program, the things that are needed to help someone improve their endurance. Now, the important thing behind all these situations is to do these things and relay these things very safely. There are a lot of different methods out there. There are a lot of different experts out there. There's a lot of different information out there, and it sometimes becomes difficult for someone to know what to read, what to do, who to believe, what is real, what is fluff or advertising, and we're certainly going to try to help with that as well. The information I'm presenting here today is based upon current research information and current best practice information from a variety of reputable sources, primarily the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Of course, they are primarily occupied now with COVID-19. The American College of Sports Medicine, which is actually kind of misnamed. A lot of folks think, okay, American College of Sports Medicine, I'm not into sports, so really doesn't have any application for me. Really, the American College of Sports Medicine chose its name way, way back when, 70 plus years ago. It's really, if nothing else, the American Academy of Human Physiology, or Human Health and Physiology. So these informations, or these pieces of information, will apply not only for someone who wishes to do something from an athletic context, but also someone who wishes to simply be healthy out there in their own real world. And so hopefully we'll be able to accomplish these objectives. If, as we go on, you have questions, there is basically a question format where you can type in your question, and Kate O'Shea at the Renew corporate office, who is handling things behind the scenes, should be able to get that information and will ask me at the end, and hopefully I'll be able to answer it. Okay, so let's review a little bit. The first presentation we gave back in February dealt with muscle strength. And as a review, the definition of muscle strength is the ability of a muscle to produce force. Basically, a muscle contracts and the degree of contraction produces force, and then that force is used for typical body activities, whether it's basically lifting something or walking up a flight of stairs or walking down the street or doing something, running, jumping, playing sports. Another way to think of muscle strength is the capacity of a muscle to perform work. Routine daily work, something as simple as picking up a pencil or brushing your teeth, or work on an assembly line, or work involving heavy lifting, heavy carrying, or athletic type of work in terms of jumping up for a jump shot in basketball, or lifting a heavy weight in weight training, or what have you. Now, the physics behind this, for folks who are interested in the actual physics and how this works in terms of actual definitions, force is the equivalent of mass times acceleration, and work is the equivalent of force times distance. This is basic physics. And the reason why I mention this is it's a comparison purpose, because mathematically and physically, strength differs from power, which we reviewed last month. When we talk about power, power has a force component, but it's the ability of a muscle to produce force or to perform work more quickly. So there's also a time component. The time component is what separates muscle strength from muscle power. So power is the equivalent of force times distance over time, which is the same as work over time. In more practical applications, the more strength that someone is able to demonstrate in a shorter period of time, the more powerful they are. More strength in less time is more powerful. So you can have a very strong muscle, but if that muscle is not able to perform quickly, it's not as powerful as someone who may have a smaller muscle, but can produce things in a shorter period of time. So that's how muscle power and muscle strength interrelate, and that's the difference between the two. Now, what then is endurance? Endurance, muscle endurance, is the ability of a muscle to produce force or its capacity to perform work for a prolonged period of time. Physics, in terms of the science of physics, basically endurance is force or work times time, whereas power is force or work divided by time. Therefore, practically, if someone can produce more strength for a longer period of time, they have more endurance. So instead of quickness, it's prolonged activity. But that makes sense. If you compare, using in athletic connotation, if you compare someone who's doing a sprint, a 100-meter dash, they're applying their muscle force in basically about 10 seconds. They have to be very powerful to complete that race in, a competitive time, a world record time, or, the purposes of winning the event for their team or what have you. However, in contrast, if you look at someone who chooses to run a marathon, a distance runner, they've got to produce their level of strength, not in 10 seconds, but over a course of several hours to cover 26 miles and 385 yards. So that person's muscle has to be able to endure force production for that period of time. So strength and power are a little bit more quick, where endurance is a prolonged period of time. Now, another way, in practical perspective, you may be saying, well, that's fine, Kent, but I'm not a sprinter. I'm not a marathon runner. I'm just an everyday person working in an office or moving weights and crates or teaching in a classroom or working on an assembly line? How is this important to me since I'm not trying to run 100 meters in 10 seconds or run a marathon? Well, the other way that's more practical to think about this is muscle endurance is the opposite of fatigue. The more endurance the muscles have, the longer someone can do something without experiencing fatigue, a breakdown of tissues, or a breakdown of health. In other words, the more endurance someone has, the less risk of injury, the less risk of illness, the less risk of simply not feeling good about things. So this is why endurance is important for everyone, including non-athletes. Why, for an athlete, is endurance important? For the athlete who has more endurance, whether they're a football player like this slide here, or a marathon runner, they can play longer, they can perform at a higher level of performance with less risk of injury. They're simply able to play longer, play better, without injury, without getting fatigued, without tiredness. And chances are that means that they will be better than their opponent, or their team will be better than the opposing team. So that's why, in an athletic connotation, it's not just strength or power, it's also endurance. For the non-athlete, why is endurance important in the everyday? It's very simple. Overall, more endurance, less fatigue means better health, longer life. And that's been demonstrated for a variety of different studies. The classic one is the Framingham Heart Study that's been done in Massachusetts for about 80 years now. Another unique situation, and this comes from the American Medical Association, folks who have more endurance, whether they're an athlete or whether they're not an athlete. The more endurance means more resistance to fatigue, means greater chance of health, means lower medical costs. Having more endurance will save someone money in the long run compared to folks who fatigue and who don't have as much endurance. And that's been shown definitively. It's not speculation, there's hard data behind it. So, one possible way to help with healthcare costs, improve someone's endurance. It's really that simple. Okay. Now, how does endurance help? Overall, improvement in endurance improves the body's ability to deliver energy to muscles for contractile activities over a longer time. It basically makes the body a more efficient machine. There's more fuel available. There's a better delivery system to the muscles, so the muscles can keep doing what they need to do over a longer period of time. In a relatively routine situation, this means someone who has better endurance won't feel tired after an 8-hour workday or several hours of overtime or an unexpected getting called in to work on the weekend or things of that regard. The more endurance, the longer you can do what you need to do or want to do without the effects of fatigue, without the chances of injury. And how does this happen within the body itself? This happens primarily through muscle fiber adaptations. In terms of those adaptations, last month we talked about basically type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. As a little bit of a review, and this is so everybody has these in all their muscle groups. Type 1 fibers, or slow twitch fibers as they've been called, are basically your endurance fibers. These muscles have a very big vascular supply. They have a lot of myoproteins. They basically are designed for long-term work, long-term postural sorts of things, long-term endurance sorts of things, whether it's in a work setting or an athletic setting. So these are your long-term fibers. And I wish the diagram here would have the color that's necessary. I could not find one that would translate well for this PowerPoint presentation. If I did, you would see that the ones listed as 1 or Roman numeral 1 would be very red. And that redness is from the large vascular supply. Very simply, they have more blood vessels bringing in more blood, which brings in more oxygen, which brings in more nutrients, which gives more fuel, so that muscle can keep working without fatiguing. Now, there are other types of muscle fibers, or actually there is an other type of muscle fiber, and those are the type 2 fibers that are called fast twitch. Basically, those can be subdivided into type 2A and type 2B. Type 2A fibers produce a lot of force in a short period of time. It's kind of like a fireworks in terms of 4th of July. It shoots off, it explodes, and then it kind of goes away. These muscles produce, or these muscle fibers produce high levels of force, but for a very short period of time. Some people have called these the sprinter fibers because they produce high levels of force analogous to someone running a 100-meter dash, but their fuel supply is gone in about 10 seconds. And that's the way the body acts physiologically. So after 10 seconds or so, that fiber is out of fuel and the body has to recover. That's why someone cannot run a 100-meter dash pace for longer than 100 meters. The body just simply does not allow that to happen. Now, what's unique about the type 2 fibers is that there's also a type 2B fiber, and that's shown with a little bit different thing. You can see the type 2 or the Roman numeral 2 and then the small letter B. If this were a colored slide, it would be more pink. The type 1 fibers would be bright red. The type 2 fibers would be pink. The type A fibers would be relatively white. Type 2 fibers have some degree of a vascular supply, but not as much as the type 1 fibers. And what's unique about these type 2 fibers is with specialized or specific training, they tend to take on the characteristics of either the type 1 or the type 2A fibers. Last month, we mentioned that with power training, the type 2B fibers start to perform more like the type 2A fibers to allow high levels of force production in a very short period of time. This enables the person to become more powerful because they become quicker. They can produce higher levels of muscle force in a shorter period of time and become more powerful. Now, what's unique about the type 2B fibers is with endurance type training, the type 2Bs start to function a little bit more like the type 1 fibers. They don't change. A type 2B does not become a type 2A, or a type 2B does not become a type 1, but it takes on more of those characteristics. So with endurance type training, the type 2B fibers start to function more like the type 1 fibers. They become slower for fatiguing. Pardon me while I take care of this sort of thing here. And basically it allows the person to have more contractile activity for a longer period of time, which produces a higher level of endurance. And so this is how things work at the cellular level, at the muscle level, to enable someone to improve their endurance capabilities. Now, let's kind of compare some things here as just a little bit of review in terms of the differences between muscle training in terms of things. Now, whether you're training for muscle strength or muscle power or muscle endurance, the title slide here shows strength, but basically it's kind of all about the same. There are different ways to skin the cat, so to speak, of training to improve strength or power or endurance. And they all kind of break down into using weights or machines or some form of dynamic activity. All of these things can be successful for improving someone's muscle function. It's a matter, quite frankly, in terms of personal preference. So let's do a little bit of comparison between the three modes of training, okay? And as I mentioned before, here are three slides. Whether it's strength training or power training or endurance training. All the things out there can be used to help with the specific tasks of helping someone become stronger or more powerful or have greater endurance, or all three in some degree of combination. So what I'm getting at is, if you take a look at a typical gym, you'll see, say, a free weight, a bench press machine, or something such as that. And you typically think, well, I use that device to become stronger. Yes, you can use it to become stronger, or you can use it to become more powerful, or you can use it to increase your endurance. It's depending upon how you use the device, what factors you adjust in terms of the actual training regimen to allow yourself to accomplish the same goal. So if you see a bench press machine, that bench press machine classically is used to improve muscle strength, but you can use it to improve power. You can use it to improve endurance. So it's not one or the other, it's how it's used. Same thing with dynamic activity. The slide shows someone jumping up and down from a box, which is a classic plyometric activity. You can do that activity to improve strength. You can do it to improve power. You can do it to improve endurance. It depends upon how someone adjusts the factors that are used to help determine and program specific exercise. So let's look at some comparisons in terms of how someone can manipulate the variables, for lack of a better term, to produce the desired effect of improving strength, power, or endurance. As a review, back in February during the strength training or strength development webinar, the generality is that to improve muscle strength, you need to do some form of exercise in the range of 6 to 8 repetitions times 2 to 4 sets at an intensity of 85 to 100%, resting 2 to 3 minutes in between sets. Now, these are general factors. As someone develops a strength training program or works with a strength coach, these may be adjusted a little bit because everyone's slightly different. While it fits the general comparison or hits the mean, so to speak, the statistical mean, there is some degree of variation. As a review, if you're doing a strength training activity and you find a weight that you can't lift 6 times, it's too heavy for you at that point in time. It's not that you shouldn't exercise using it or try to exercise using it. It's just that your chances of injury increase. On the other hand, if you find a weight that you can lift more than 8 times, your training, it's not that, okay, it's not a bad thing. It's just that it ceases to be less of a strength training effect and more of a different type of training effect. It actually becomes more of an endurance training effect. So if you're training just for strength, you might want to add a little bit more weight to keep that activity, whatever it is, whether it's a free weight or a kettlebell or a weight machine or whatever you want to do, keep it in the range of 6 to 8 repetitions. And 2 to 4 sets, there's nothing wrong with doing only 1 set. There's nothing wrong with doing 5 sets. It's just that the research indicates that 2 to 4 sets has the greatest efficiency for developing muscle strength. Also, looking at the intensity of 85 to 100% is more effective for developing muscle strength. Less than 85%, you're not getting as much strength as you are, say, endurance or potentially power. If you're trying to go above 100%, you're definitely at the risk of tissue damage and injury. And also you need a rest interval because the body doesn't recover like an on-off switch. It's not like it needs to reboot like a computer, but the muscles need to rest to allow the physiology to keep good stuff coming in and remove the waste products from the activity out of the muscles. So again, with strength training, the targets are 6 to 8 repetitions, 2 to 4 sets, an intensity level of 85 to 100%, resting 2 to 3 minutes in between each set. Now with power training, the variables change just a little bit. For power training, the sweet spot for efficient development is 3 to 5 repetitions, but just 1 set. one set of 3 to 5 reps. One set of 1 rep is just simply not efficient for power development. One set of more than 5 reps is also not efficient for pure power development. You start to get more into an endurance component. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if one of your goals is power, you need to kind of fall into the factors and the format for power training. The intensity is a little bit lower than strength training because we want to get the time factor in. So the sweet spot or the zone for intensity for power training is 70 to 85%. And the rest is different. Instead of resting in between sets, and so there's only one, the rest is 30 to 90 seconds in between reps. So you're doing one set of 3 to 5 reps, but in between each rep, you're resting 30 to 90 seconds. This is based upon various studies in a variety of different contexts, in patients who have some form of debility, in normal folks, in athletes, in pediatric folks ages 12 and up, in adolescents, in college students, in adults, and also in older folks over the last 100 years or so from a variety of different sources. So these are the current suggestions, or if nothing else, the starting points for someone who wants to begin a strength training or a power training or both with a minimum risk of injury and trying to get maximum returns within the shortest period of time. Now, let's look at endurance and compare these. Unfortunately, I couldn't get these on a single slide without making the print too small. So endurance, when we're talking about repetitions, we're talking about many reps. We're not limiting the number of repetitions. We're talking about a relatively lower level of intensity, at least initially. To back up just a second, strength training, we're talking 6 to 8 reps. Power training, we're talking 3 to 5 reps. Intensity levels up to 100% or at least 70% for power training. With endurance training, we're talking many, many more repetitions at maybe a lower intensity rate, starting at 55%. Below 55%, you're getting some degree of activity. There may be some health benefits, but you're really not affecting the muscle activity. So there's nothing wrong with doing something below 45%. It's just that it's more efficient, below 55%. It's just more efficient for endurance and for muscle and health development if your minimum intensity level is 55%. Above 85%, doing many, many repetitions in an endurance context runs the risk of injury. In terms of duration, backing up just a second, we were talking about numbers of sets or rest intervals in terms of the number of sets for strength training, 2 to 4, power training for 1. Basically, for endurance training, we're not dealing with sets, we're dealing with duration. Endurance training requires a minimum of 20 minutes duration, or 20 minutes of some degree of muscle performance at an intensity level of 55 to 85%. And this can prolong up to, say, 60 minutes. Now, these are the starting points. This would be the baseline for folks who wish to improve their endurance. Certainly someone who is already an endurance athlete or someone who has to work for a long period of time can consistently, say the 3 12-hour shifts versus the 5 8-hour shift or the 4 10-hour days. These sorts of situations would require additional sorts of modifications. So basically the duration is at least 20 minutes and roughly up to 60 minutes or longer. Early on, if someone is just starting to improve their endurance or endurance training program, they want to keep it no longer than 60 minutes to avoid the risk of injury. Now, what's interesting about endurance training is the rest interval, so to speak. To back up just a second, when we're talking strength training, you want to rest 2 to 3 minutes in between sets to allow the muscle to recover. For power training, you want to rest 30 to 90 seconds in between repetitions. to allow the muscles recover. When we're looking at endurance training, you want to rest 3 times or at least 3 times the duration of the endurance exercise, because it's not just the muscles that have to recover, it's the tendons, it's the ligaments, it's the bones, it's the cardiovascular system itself. So there's more than just the muscles that have to recover from the activity, hence the need for a longer recovery period, a longer rest. So if someone is doing an endurance exercise of 20 minutes, to avoid injury, they need to rest at least 60 minutes or 3 times 20 before they try some other sort of exercise to avoid the risk of injury. So if they're talking about a 60-minute or an hour-long training program, they need to rest 3 times that or up to 3 hours to avoid the risk of injury. Now, in terms of frequency, for endurance training, 3 or more days a week. 3 days a week is been found to be the minimum that's needed to efficiently and effectively improve muscle endurance. But this also means that if done the correct way, you could endurance train on a daily basis, as long as you're keeping the intensity and the duration and the rest intervals under control. So this is not necessarily just a 3-day-a-week situation. Okay, let's moving on here a little bit. Now, when we're talking about endurance training, there are many, many, many possibilities. The classic one would include the part of the slide on the left, running or jogging, but you could also use kettlebells. Kettlebells are more considered as a strength or a power production thing, but if you apply the factors appropriately, kettlebell training can be done to improve endurance. And so it's not just the weightlifting gym application. You can use the weightlifting gym applications like kettlebells or free weights to help improve muscle endurance. Things such as ballroom dancing, aerobic dancing, Zumba, various exercise classes can also improve endurance. Simple walking can also help to improve endurance. And when we're talking walking, we're talking walking. We're not talking about just kind of sauntering or taking 2 steps and stopping to admire a flower. We're talking about walking. It doesn't have to be race walking or power walking. Just basically straightforward walking can help improve endurance. Bicycling, whether it's a stationary bike, whether it's a mountain bike, whether it's a trail bike, whether it's a bike, can help improve endurance training as long as you apply the different principles. Swimming, cross-country skiing, there are many different things out there that can vary by the time of year that will help to improve someone's endurance. And again, the real importance of endurance is whether or not you're a strength athlete or someone whose normal work involves a lot of strength, or a power athlete, or someone whose normal day involves a lot of power activities such as lifting or carrying or assembly line work. Endurance is important because it allows you to do those activities for a longer period of time and decrease the chance of tissue damage, injury, and it basically helps promote better health, well-being, and decreased healthcare costs. So that's why endurance is important, not just for the runner who's trying to run a marathon, but basically for everyone, or at least knowledge of these things is important for everyone because it simply helps people stay healthy for a longer period of time, and it's less expensive in the course of their life. So that's the importance of endurance. Now, this webinar was designed to present the general principles for muscle endurance. Now, these general principles are, again, just kind of out there for everyone, but every individual has their own specific needs. And it's not possible for a webinar to basically to give that sort of specific information. However, individual and specific programs can be developed at any Renuke physical therapy clinic through basically a physician referral under the the formal sort of insurance-based program. There are basically self-pay situations, and there are also free visits that are available. So if you are someone out there who wants more information on developing programs, exercise programs for strength, power, endurance, or all of those combined, please feel free to get in contact with any of our facilities throughout the Great Lakes Bay region, including our newest facilities in, say, Tawas City and at the Saginaw YMCA, where we can basically put you in touch with professionals who can help you solve the problem, help you achieve your goals, help you get to where you need to be, and more importantly, not only get you where you need to be, but hopefully help you stay there and decrease your chance of injury and illness. So with that, before we open it up to questions, if you have specific questions for me after this webinar or at any point in time, or if you disagree with what we're talking about here, feel free to give me, a call. If I'm available, I'll answer your phone call at the clinic phone number. If you'd rather send me a fax, there's the fax number. But probably the best way to do this would be via email, and there's my email address. And I will do my best to reply to your comments or reply to your questions and get you the information that you need in a short period of time. So with that, I'd like to open up the the floor, so to speak, and answer any questions that might have come in. And hopefully, regardless of whether or not questions have come in, hopefully this has been a worthwhile experience. And I look forward to the opportunity to speak with folks in the future and present future webinars. Kate, are there any questions?
Thanks so much, Kent. We actually didn't have any questions come in today, but I wanted to say thank you not only for this webinar, but for the athletic performance series that this has been part of. This is the third in that series. So thank you so much. And we're looking forward to May 19th at noon. Kent will also be hosting a webinar about avoiding injury in sports like tennis and pickleball and racquetball, because they have a lot of the same risks. So I'll make sure that's in the follow-up email that we send to all of our registrants.
Okay. And again, if you do have questions or concerns, basically feel free to get in contact with me or get in contact with any of our folks at any of our locations. We're all a great big team. We're all a network. We are all basically local folks. So our problems are your problems. Our goals are your goals. And our overall goal, of course, is to try to promote health, wellness, and keep people doing what they want to do and meeting their goals and staying healthy. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I appreciate the opportunity, and we hope to see you soon in a future webinar, or I hope to hear from you at some point in the future if you have any questions, if I can be of any help at all. Thank
Thanks
you
so much,
again very
Kent.
much.
Thanks, we appreciate you.